The first blank should be filled with collaborate because it indicates that the departments of astronomy and physics will work together on research. This collaboration is essential as both departments have overlapping interests in the physics of the early universe. The second blank should be filled with overlap because it shows that the two departments share common ground in their research areas. The third blank should be filled with discoveries because it refers to the findings of dark matter and dark energy, which challenge our understanding of fundamental physics. The fourth blank should be filled with involve because it describes how leading theories in physics require high energies that can only be tested using the universe as a laboratory. The fifth blank should be filled with laboratory because it indicates that the universe is used as a testing ground for these high-energy theories. The first blank should be filled with passive because it contrasts with the active process of reading. Reading is not a passive activity, it requires engagement and interaction with the text. The second blank should be filled with specific because it describes the context in which we read, which affects our perception and understanding. The third blank should be filled with approach because it refers to how we engage with the text based on our purpose. The fourth blank should be filled with determine because it explains how our purpose and background knowledge influence the strategies we use to read the text. The first blank should be filled with fall because it explains the decrease in student applications, which is one of the reasons for the closures. The second blank should be filled with factor because it identifies money as a contributing element to the problem. The third blank should be filled with funding because it refers to the financial support from the government, which is concentrated on a small number of top departments. The fourth blank should be filled with risk because it highlights the increased danger to other departments that do not receive as much funding. The first blank should be filled with effects because it describes the impact of polluting energy sources like oil or coal. The second blank should be filled with answer because it presents wind farms as a solution to the pollution problem. The third blank should be filled with machines because it refers to the wind turbines with their enormous rotating blades. The fourth blank should be filled with regions because it indicates the areas where wind farms are becoming more common. The fifth blank should be filled with feature because it describes the presence of wind farms in the landscape, which some people find unwelcome. The first blank should be filled with comes because it describes the water reaching a certain height during a tsunami. The second blank should be filled with force because it explains the power of the water, which can knock a person down even if the wave is only knee-high. The third blank should be filled with objects because it refers to obstacles in the water's path, such as walls. The fourth blank should be filled with debris because it describes the materials, like rocks and trees, that the water gathers as it flows, causing more destruction. The first blank should be filled with grains because it refers to particles of sand that can be blown far inland. The second blank should be filled with fertile because it describes productive land that can be transformed into desert by drifting sands. The third blank should be filled with planting because it refers to the introduction of marram grass to stabilize the dunes. The fourth blank should be filled with nourishment because it describes the sustenance found by the grass even in sand. The fifth blank should be filled with surface because it refers to the top layer of the dune that the grass spreads over, protecting it against wind. The first blank should be filled with scheme because it refers to a plan or program, such as a health insurance or company pension scheme. The second blank should be filled with ensure because it means to make certain that the benefits are provided fairly. The third blank should be filled with avoid because it means to prevent discrimination. The fourth blank should be filled with includes because it means to contain, referring to the entitlement to low-interest loans. The fifth blank should be filled with treatment because it refers to the way employees are dealt with, which should be equal for both male and female employees. The first blank should be filled with rate because it refers to the speed of technological change. The second blank should be filled with dying because it describes skills becoming obsolete due to rapid technological advancements. The third blank should be filled with less because it indicates a shorter time frame in which a laptop becomes obsolete. The fourth blank should be filled with trained because it refers to the preparation of people in necessary skills, which is decreasing as companies invest more in machines. The first blank should be filled with exist because it means to be present, referring to the importance of preserving sportswomen's records. The second blank should be filled with point because it refers to a specific detail that needs to be addressed while there is still a chance. The third blank should be filled with chance because it means an opportunity to interview people and preserve records. The fourth blank should be filled with lost because it means no longer available, referring to the stories that will be lost if records are not kept. The first blank should be filled with weather because it refers to atmospheric conditions, specifically an ice storm. The second blank should be filled with cold because it describes the temperature of the rainfall. The third blank should be filled with ice because it refers to the frozen water that forms during the storm. The fourth blank should be filled with more because it indicates a larger number of households affected by the blackout. The fifth blank should be filled with during because it refers to the time when the blackout occurred due to the ice storm. The first blank should be filled with exceptionally because it indicates that light pollution is extremely high in coastal regions of tropic and temperate zones. The second blank should be filled with in some way because it explains that many species' ecology or behavior depends on natural light cycles. The third blank should be filled with relying because it describes how sea turtle hatchlings depend on light cues to find the sea. The fourth blank should be filled with to move away from because artificial lighting can cause hatchlings to move in the wrong direction. The fifth blank should be filled with interfere because artificial light disrupts the hatchlings' ability to orient themselves. The first blank should be filled with comparisons because the article compares fertility rates between Australia and other OECD countries. The second blank should be filled with patterns because it refers to the changing age patterns of fertility. The third blank should be filled with postponing because it describes how women are delaying childbirth. The fourth blank should be filled with associations because it refers to the relationships between women's education levels, employment rates, and fertility. The fifth blank should be filled with explored because the article investigates these associations. The first blank should be filled with in because it indicates a change in the way symphony orchestras recruit musicians. The second blank should be filled with recruit because it refers to the process of hiring musicians. The third blank should be filled with revised because it describes how orchestras changed their audition policies. The fourth blank should be filled with conceal because the screen hides the identity of the candidate. The fifth blank should be filled with increases because the screen raises the probability of women advancing in auditions. The sixth blank should be filled with advanced because it refers to women moving forward in the audition process. The first blank should be filled with void because it describes the mind as empty of ideas. The second blank should be filled with boundless because it refers to the limitless imagination of humans. The third blank should be filled with founded because it explains that all knowledge is based on experience. The fourth blank should be filled with derives because it means that knowledge comes from experience. The first blank should be filled with positive because it contrasts with the negative allure of books. The second blank should be filled with discover because it describes how young readers learn about the world through books. The third blank should be filled with prey because it refers to how authors and publishers exploit young readers' desires. The fourth blank should be filled with sell because it describes how they market junk food like content to young readers. The first blank should be filled with harmless because it describes carbon dioxide as usually not dangerous. The second blank should be filled with concentrated because it explains that the gas is not usually found in one spot. The third blank should be filled with underground because it refers to the gas being trapped beneath the surface. The fourth blank should be filled with cloud because it describes the dense formation of gas that can be deadly. The first blank should be filled with journey because it describes the sun's daily movement across the sky. The second blank should be filled with became because it explains how stars were recognized. The third blank should be filled with secrets because it refers to the mysteries of the universe. The fourth blank should be filled with determine because it describes the process of understanding the nature of wandering stars. The fifth blank should be filled with predict because it refers to forecasting the positions of stars. The first blank should be filled with examine because it describes the investigation of Australia's history. The second blank should be filled with emerged because it explains how the society developed. The third blank should be filled with settlements because it refers to the early British convict colonies. The fourth blank should be filled with retains because it describes how Australia maintains links with its colonial past. The fifth blank should be filled with increasingly because it indicates that Australia is becoming more independent and diverse. The first blank should be filled with general because it refers to the overall population. The second blank should be filled with proportion because it describes the percentage of people visiting complementary health therapists. The third blank should be filled with therapists because it refers to the practitioners of complementary health. The fourth blank should be filled with contrasted because it compares the rates of visits to different health professionals. The fifth blank should be filled with acceptance because it explains the lower levels of approval for complementary therapies among older people. The first blank should be filled with reconstruct because it describes the process of understanding the original thought from written words. The second blank should be filled with little because it indicates the minimal difficulty in conversation. The third blank should be filled with cut because it refers to the ability to interrupt in a dialogue. The fourth blank should be filled with converging because it describes the process of approaching ideas from different directions. The fifth blank should be filled with tone because it refers to the physical expression of emphasis in speech.